So this video has been a long time coming. I've been getting a lot of interest in it lately, and I feel like now more than ever is a great time to be putting it out because there's just a lot of FUD and misconceptions floating around about XRP, and I usually respond to these with tweets, but it seems like I keep getting asked the same questions again and again, or I keep getting the same FUD pouring out from different sources, and frankly, it takes a lot of effort to have to reply to everyone with the same exact response every single time. So I decided to make a video to quickly address majority of the FUD that I hear, the biggest issues that I hear that are perpetrated that are false. That way, I don't need to keep responding to each and every person individually with the same answer. But I want to make this video, and I want to make it very clear that this video is specifically about debunking FUD. I'm going to be talking about some big misconceptions about XRP as a whole. I will not be getting into price predictions, or I will not be talking about price, or this is not an argument for why I think XRP is headed higher in the coming years. That is a topic for another time. I've talked about it many times, and I'll probably talk about it again, but this particular video is not about price or an argument for why price should go up. That's a completely different story that I'm going to save for another time. This video is going to focus specifically on FUD, guys, specifically on issues that I've seen pop up time and time again, and I want to make them clear once and for all. So just want to make sure you guys know exactly what this video is about. Furthermore, guys, it is a long video. It is over an hour long, and for that reason, I've decided to give you guys little timestamps. Right here at the beginning, I'm going to show you in a second, little timestamps to kind of separate each topic of FUD so that if you guys don't have an hour to watch the video, which I'm sure many of you don't, you can watch it in bits and pieces and focus on those aspects of FUD that you're most interested in. You can go forward and backward and find which topics you have most interest in, watch those, or you could watch a little chunks at a time if you have a busy schedule, which I know many of you do, myself included. So guys, I've spent 5 to 6 hours working on this video. It took a lot of time. I've done all the research myself in the past, but to compile it all up together again for you guys took an extensive amount of time, not to mention the amount of time it took for me to edit this video. So please, guys, if you did enjoy this video and if you did learn something from it, please like, comment, share, and subscribe, and spread this video around so that we can debunk some of that FUD for good. All right, guys, we're going to take a look at Ripple's quarterly reports. They post these reports every quarter, every 3 months, and within these reports, we can see exactly how much XRP was sold, whether that was through OTC sales or through programmatic sales. Programmatic sales is another word of selling onto the market, and OTC sales are sales that are done to their partners that they're building partnerships with, right? So when people talk about Ripple dumping on the markets, they're essentially talking about the programmatic sales aspect of this. These are sales that are sold directly onto exchanges, and this is where the Ripple dumping XRP narrative comes from. But let's go ahead and take a look at their Q2 XRP report, and this will give us an idea of how they decide how much XRP to sell per quarter and what information they tell us before these sales are made. So this is an example of the Q2 sales. Ripple sold $251 million worth of XRP, not 251 million XRP, but $251 million worth of XRP in Q2 2019, and is substantially reducing future sales of XRP. To give you guys an idea of how they calculate this, they calculate the amount of sales that they make based on the global XRP volume, all right? So the global XRP volume was, for this quarter, $53.85 billion of XRP. The amount of sales that Ripple contributed to for this volume was 0.32% of total volume, all right? So of the $53.85 billion of XRP that was traded on exchanges, Ripple was only accountable for 0.32 of 1%. That's 1/3% of that total volume, all right? So when people say that Ripple's suppressing the price and then they're dumping massive amounts of XRP onto the market, it's simply not true, guys. They're dumping less than 1/3% of XRP onto the markets, okay? So this small fraction of sales really is insignificant when it comes to price suppression, all these theories that people have about how much XRP is being sold, all right? Now, on top of that, they give forward guidance, and they essentially here are telling us that next quarter, we plan on reducing this 0.32% to 0.1%. That's 0.1% of 1% of the total volume in billions of XRP traded on exchanges, all right? They're essentially telling us that next quarter, you can expect not to see more than 0.1% of sales volume from us, okay, directly. So they're giving this forward guidance to prepare anyone who's interested in XRP to prepare them ahead of time, to let them know that, hey, this is the amount of XRP you can expect to be sold this next quarter, okay? Now, what do these numbers mean? What do they translate to in terms of actual XRP sales? Okay, let's take a look at XRP sales by Ripple, all right? This includes programmatic sales, which are the cryptocurrency exchanges in red. These are programmatic sales onto the market, and then institutional sales, which are OTC sales to partners as well, okay? This is the amount of XRP sold denoted in millions of US dollars, okay, per quarter, all right? So as you can see here, guys, sales ramped up as volume was increasing in 2017. We had constant volume increases during the bull run, of course. So sales are ramping up to coincide with that increase in volume. But again, it's a small fraction of the actual volume, a fraction of a percent. And we had the most sales that they've ever done here in 2019, quarter 2 2019, which is the report that we were looking at. And that was about 250 million US dollars worth of XRP that was dumped, as people like to say, on exchanges, all right? After that period in time, those sales have declined significantly. But this was essentially the peak of XRP sales onto the markets, all right? Now, people always throw these numbers around, all right? They throw these numbers around. $250 million worth of XRP was sold. Oh my God, that's so much. Let's take a look at what this translates to in relation to other cryptocurrencies, all right? We know that Bitcoin, and guys, let me be very clear here, all right? This video is not a video about XRP versus Bitcoin or XRP versus Litecoin or XRP versus Ethereum. I'm not trying to compare XRP to any other coin and say that XRP is better or worse. I'm just trying to show you guys objective data and compare it to the closest thing that we have, all right? So the closest thing that we have to XRP sales is sales by miners when it comes to proof of work coins, right? So both XRP sales and sales of created coins by miners are two different ways of increasing the circulating supply of these coins, right? For XRP, because XRP isn't mined, right? Their way of increasing XRP into the market is through sales by Ripple. This is the way that the circulating supply of XRP increases and inflation occurs for the XRP token. For Bitcoin, the way that inflation occurs is through sales of tokens that are mined by miners, right? So essentially, Ripple selling XRP and Bitcoin miners selling Bitcoin are two different ways of increasing circulating supply of these coins. And in both cases, these coins are being sold onto the market and they're being added then into the circulating supply. So let's take a look at how much Bitcoin, for example, is sold every quarter to kind of give us an idea of what do these numbers really mean. What exactly is 250 million? Is that a lot? Is that a little in relation to the amount that's being sold for Bitcoin? So in 2019, Bitcoin miners made an estimated $5 billion in revenue. This means that they sold an estimated $5 billion of Bitcoin on the markets, okay? This is based on the 12.5 Bitcoin block reward and the number of blocks that are mined on average as well. Okay, now one more caveat. This is important. This is not exactly accurate, as some companies retain a portion of their mined BTC to sell at a later date. So a company may mine 100 Bitcoin, they may sell 80, or they may mine 100 Bitcoin, they may sell 70 on the markets that month. So what this is basically trying to say is that this is assuming that every Bitcoin that's mined is instantly sold, and that's not always the case. Some companies are holding portions of their Bitcoin to sell at a later date. Now, keep in mind, these are businesses. These are companies running as a business. They have bills to pay. They have electricity costs to pay. If it costs them $5,000 to mine a Bitcoin and they're selling them on the market for $6,000, they're making $1,000 of profit. They're not hoarding 50, 60, 70% of the Bitcoin they're mining. It's not feasible to hoard that much Bitcoin because they have bills to pay that are very expensive. So when I talk about not selling everything on market directly, them hoarding some of it, we're talking about a small portion, maybe 10%, maybe 20% of the Bitcoin that's mined is held. The rest is sold on the market immediately, all right? So now we know that the amount of Bitcoin that is dumped on the markets every year for the last 2 years has been approximately 5 billion. How does that compare to the amount of Ripple and XRP that is being dumped on the market? Let's take a look at that next. All right, guys, so I made this chart myself, this little graph. This shows us exactly how those numbers compare. Recall that Bitcoin miner sales of Bitcoin, approximately 5 billion over a year. If you divide that by 4 quarters, it's approximately $1.2 billion worth of Bitcoin is being sold on the markets every quarter. That is the green bar right here. These are approximate average Bitcoin miner sales of Bitcoin every quarter. We're talking about $1.2 billion of Bitcoin sold on exchanges, dumped on exchanges by miners, all right? And guys, one more thing that I want to make clear to make sure that we get as objective of a picture of this as we can, is that these numbers that we're talking about, sales in dollar terms, we have to keep in mind that the market cap of Bitcoin is definitely a lot larger than the market cap of XRP. So it wouldn't be right to simply compare dollars versus dollars. Bitcoin is bound to have more sales in dollar terms because the market cap is larger. The value of a single Bitcoin is larger. So the actual thing that we need to be comparing is the inflation rate, which is going to be the number or the amount of new coins of XRP or Bitcoin introduced to the existing supply, the amount of coins that are being added to the current circulating supply, which is essentially the inflation rate. All right. Now, another key distinction to make, we already know that Bitcoin has 16, 17 million coins in existence, and over time, new coins essentially get created. So there is actually an inflation rate, is the right term, because these coins are being created out of from the proof of work concept and then added to circulating supply. Now, in Ripple's case, there are no more coins are actually created. The 100 billion has already been created since inception, and 50 billion are locked away in an escrow that's essentially untouchable. So while new coins are added to the circulating supply of Bitcoin through proof of work and mining, new coins are added to the circulating supply of Ripple through their sales. So again, two different ways of increasing the circulating supply. So calling the Ripple increase in circulating supply, they make a distinction. It's not actually technically inflation because no new coins of XRP are actually being created. XRP, the 100 billion, is the 100 billion and no more are being created. But of the 50 billion that's locked away, some of those are being released into the circulating supply. So rather than calling it an inflation rate, we can call it a distribution rate, right? So again, inflation for Bitcoin because new coins are being created, distribution for XRP because new coins are being added to circulating supply. But the bottom line is that the amount of coins in the circulating supply is growing through one of these two methods, right? So when we look at the inflation rate based on the amount of XRP being added to circulating supply and the amount of Bitcoin being added to its circulating supply, and we get away from these nominal numbers and go to a percentage way of expressing this. As of Q3 2019, starting from this quarter here, the percentage of XRP that was introduced into supply versus the percentage of Bitcoin that was introduced into supply was actually less. So there was less inflation of XRP starting from Q3 2019 than there was of Bitcoin, right? Now, of course, in 2020, there's the halving and the Bitcoin inflation rate gets cut in half. But right over here for Q3 2019, up until May of this year, essentially, the Bitcoin inflation rate, annual inflation rate, was approximately 3.5%, okay? So 3.5% divided by 12 gives us a monthly inflation rate of 0.3%, all right? And then if we multiply that by 3 per quarter, we get the quarterly inflation rate of 0.875%, okay? So I'm going to we're going to talk about inflation in a second. 0.875% per quarter is the average amount of inflation that Bitcoin sees. 0.875%, an additional 0.875% of Bitcoin is added to the circulating supply every quarter, okay? Starting from Q3 2019, the actual inflation rate of XRP was less than 0.875%, okay? It was approximately, I think, around 0.7%. So starting from Q3 2019, the amount of XRP being added to XRP circulating supply was 0.7%, which is less than the amount of Bitcoin being added to Bitcoin supply starting again in Q3 of 2019. Now, of course, Q4 of 2019, that number dropped by a fifth, right? And of course, the price of XRP, although it may have dropped from Q3 2019 to Q4 2019, it didn't decrease significantly. So this means that inflation rate, which over here was around 0.7%, dropped even further here in Q4 2019. And of course, in Q1 2020, that inflation rate dropped even further, but it's almost an inflation rate of 0 for Q1 2020, okay? Meanwhile, Bitcoin maintained that 0.875% inflation per quarter all the way through Q1 of 2020, and in Q2 of 2020, that amount will be cut in half, and it'll drop from 0.875% down to what it should be around 0.3 to 0.4%. Okay, so this is when Bitcoin's inflation rate officially gets cut in half through the halving. It's going to happen every 4 years. But the point I'm trying to make here, guys, is that Ripple's inflation rate is actually less than Bitcoin and has been since Q3 of 2019. The last almost year, there's been less inflation of XRP to the markets than there has of Bitcoin. So people are complaining about Ripple dumping exorbitant amounts of XRP into the markets, causing mass inflation of XRP, this endless supply that everyone likes to talk about. They're not looking at things objectively, guys. Objectively, the inflation of XRP has been less than Bitcoin since Q3 of 2019. That's a simple fact. And so the amount that Ripple's actually dumping on the markets, again, is a fraction of a percent of a volume, average volume per day. The inflation rate's less than that of Bitcoin. It's really nothing unusual for as far as inflation rates go of these types of coins. Ethereum also has an inflation rate, and Litecoin as well. These are all coins that they're all inflating. That's how the supply is increasing, right? So in the same way, Ripple's doing that now. Because Ripple isn't proof of work, there's no mining involved, right? So there's no mining to cause this inflation rate to occur. So Ripple does that by distributing coins. That's how the inflation, again, I should say distribution rate of XRP rises. But it's the same for any other coin that's proof of work. And in fact, it's actually less than our favorite coin here, Bitcoin. So to be objective, really, the idea of Ripple dumping exorbitant amounts in the market and causing all these problems is completely false. I mean, yes, they are selling XRP on the market. However, that amount that they're selling is a very small amount. It's negligible when it comes to daily volume, and it's comparable to the inflation rates of other major coins like Bitcoin, Litecoin, and Ethereum. Right? And one other thing I want to mention, guys, oftentimes I hear people saying, well, the difference between proof of work and Ripple selling onto the market is that proof of work, I mean, people are paying money to create this Bitcoin, right? That gives it value. They're saying, oh, well, people have to actually solve these problems, run these computer programs. So therefore, the creation of Bitcoin is legitimate. Whereas with Ripple, they're just selling these pre-minted coins on the market. So that's illegitimate. That doesn't count. That's the wrong way of doing it. So that Ripple doesn't have any value because it's already been created. Guys, when we talk about the price of one Bitcoin being at $8,000, that price of Bitcoin at $8,000, the reason that Bitcoin is priced so high is because of the expense, because of the cost to produce a Bitcoin, right? If Bitcoin costs $6,000 to produce and it sells for $8,000, what does that tell you? That tells you that of that $8,000, $6,000 of that value is coming from the production cost of Bitcoin because that's how much it costs to produce it, right? The other $2,000 of value is derived from speculation, potential use of the product, actual demand. It's the other 2,000 is what people are valuing Bitcoin at minus the production cost, right? So you take XRP and say, well, it's worth nothing because it's free to produce or they produced it for free. That's not the case, guys. It's worth what it is worth today because the value is derived from other aspects besides the actual cost to produce, right? If XRP costed $10,000 to produce an XRP, it wouldn't be selling for 30 cents. It'd be selling for $10,000.30, right? My point is that the amount of the value that's coming from the cost to produce is one thing, but there's another separate amount of value that's coming from other factors. And with the factor of the cost value and the factor of these other values, you get the final price today, okay? If Ripple costed, through proof of work, if it costed $2 to produce one Ripple, then the price of Ripple would be over $2 because the intrinsic cost of it is $2. So that plus any other added values make the price maybe $2.30 for an XRP, right? But when we talk about the current price of XRP being 30 cents, it's so cheap. It's as cheap as it is because there hasn't been any electricity generated to produce it, right? It doesn't cost money to produce this asset, but it still has value. That value is determined by the market, and the market values all the other aspects of XRP at 30 cents a unit, just like it values all the other aspects of Bitcoin at the difference between the cost to produce and the selling price. If the cost to produce is $6,000, the selling price is $8,000, then the market is attributing $2,000 worth of value per Bitcoin for all its other functionalities and use cases. That's exactly what the point is. So the idea that that because XRP isn't mined or there's no work put in to create it, it's useless is a false one. It's worth exactly what it sells for on the market today, and that includes everything, including the cost to produce, which happens to be none, and all the other factors that are attributed to it. So this whole Ripple dumping narrative, guys, I'm trying to be objective as possible, and I hope you are as well. And I hope you can see from this chart that to say that Ripple is dumping XRP on the market as if they're dumping an exorbitant amount of XRP on the market and just it's just completely blown out of proportion. The narrative is way overdone, guys. Look at this chart explains it all. I don't know how much more clear it could get, but the amount of XRP being sold by Ripple on the markets every quarter is a fraction of the amount of Bitcoin being sold on the markets every quarter by Bitcoin miners. This is the problem that I have with people propagating this narrative of Ripple dumping coins in the market as if it's some outrageous thing that's happening. Guys, they're not dumping a lot of coins in the market. It's very clear here. And this is why I get frustrated when people talk about Ripple dumping. Oh, how's the price ever going to go up? Ripple's dumping on the market. or the price will never rise, Ripple's dumping in the market. Guys, the sell pressure created by Ripple selling coins in the market is a fraction of the sell pressure that we see on Bitcoin being sold on the market. Now, again, guys, I'm not here to compare Ripple and Bitcoin. I'm not trying to say that Bitcoin is any worse than Ripple or that Bitcoin miner sales of Bitcoin onto the market is a negative thing. It's not. It doesn't matter to me. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that these same individuals that complain about Ripple dumping XRP in the market are completely turning a blind eye to the amount of Bitcoin being dumped on the market. And I think this is my way of saying that, look, it doesn't matter that Ripple is selling XRP in the market because it's a very small percentage of the actual volume traded. It's not affecting sell pressure on the coin. It's not holding price down. It's a negligible effect in reality. And this chart, I believe, makes that very, very, very clear, all right? All right, now guys, one more thing I want to clarify because there's also a lot of confusion about this. The escrow, how does it work exactly? Now, the way that the escrow works is that Ripple has locked 55 billion XRP, which is 55% of the total possible supply, into a series of escrows. These escrows are in the ledger itself. The ledger mechanics enforced by consensus control the release of XRP. The escrow consists of independent on-ledger escrows that release a total of 1 billion XRP each month over the next 55 months. And this is where that 1 billion XRP every month idea has come from, okay? Because that's the amount of XRP that is released every month by the escrow. Now, this is 1 billion XRP. It's not $1 billion worth of XRP. At current prices of about 20 cents, 1 billion XRP equates to about $200 million worth of XRP. Now, this provides an upper limit on the amount of new XRP that can be brought into circulation because they can't set, even if they wanted to dump the entire amount that's released from escrow into the markets, they can't dump more than 1 billion XRP, which again, at current price is about $200 million worth of XRP. That's the max that they could dump, even if they ignored all their rules about dumping a fraction of the volume of XRP traded, and they decided, hey, let's just dump it all. The max that they could dump in 1 month at current rates is about $200 million worth, okay? The amount of XRP actually released into circulation will likely be much less than this. We've seen that, guys. Again, in Q2 of 2019, it was $251 million worth of XRP. Remember, there was a billion XRP released, and of that, in Q2, they sold a billion XRP released per month. Q2 is 3 months, so of 3 billion XRP that was released, they only sold $251 million worth of that XRP. Right? At current, I think the price in Q2 is about 35 to 40 cents. So if the amount of XRP that they could have sold on the markets would have been 3 billion times 30 cents, we're looking at about $1 billion worth of XRPs, what they could have sold in those 3 months. They sold 1/4 of that, okay? So again, the actual amount of XRP that's sold and released into circulation, the inflation rate will likely be much less than this. Any additional XRP left over each month will be placed into a new escrow to release in the first month in which no escrow currently releases. In other words, 5 years later, right? So whatever XRP is not sold is put back in and locked away for another 5 years, okay? So yes, 1 billion XRP is released per month. A fraction of that, a small fraction of that is actually sold by Ripple. And again, going back to our graph, the actual amount that's being sold by Ripple is a very, very small amount, a very, very small amount relative to what's being released by other proof of work coins, okay? And that covers, I think, most of the misconceptions about XRP, the escrow, the amount of XRP being sold, Ripple dumping, as people like to say. It's all blown out of proportion, guys, and those are the facts. You guys can interpret it how you want, but you've seen how much is being sold. You see how much is being sold on other coins, on other proof of work coins. You guys can come to your conclusions. I think it's pretty straightforward about the reality of this XRP dumping myth. All right, guys, the next topic of FUD that I want to debunk is the idea that there's simply no demand for XRP, all right? People look at XRP, they look at the chart, they see that the price is low, that it's been essentially dropping for the last 2 years and hasn't seen any significant moves to the upside, while other coins have been making moves to the upside. And they say, well, that's because there's no demand for XRP. No one wants XRP. If people wanted XRP, the price would be rising. If it's not rising, that simply means no one wants it. Guys, that's not how this works. It's not how it works. The most basic way of interpreting demand for any coin in this space is by looking at market cap, okay? And the reason that we look at market cap is because market cap is a simple and easy way to tell what the demand for any one of these coins is. The entire cryptocurrency market cap is made up of thousands of cryptocurrency coins. And essentially, investors are voting with their dollars on what coins they believe have the most value, all right? This essentially tells us that Bitcoin currently is the #1 most valued cryptocurrency because it has the largest market cap, all right? A little bit more market cap. What does market cap mean for some of those who don't quite understand what it means? Let's take a look on what exactly market cap means, all right? So market cap, and this is talking about stocks, but the idea is similar with cryptos despite there's one caveat, but we'll get to that. But market capitalization refers to the total dollar market value of a company's outstanding shares. In our case, it's the total dollar market value of a company's coins, okay? Not companies, of a coin, all right? Commonly referred to as market cap, it's calculated by multiplying the total number of companies' outstanding shares, in our case, the total number of coins, by the current market price of one share, by the current market price of one coin, in our case, all right? An example, a company with 10 million shares, in our case coins, selling for $100 each would have a market cap of $1 billion. In our case, the amount of Bitcoin in circulation or the amount of XRP in circulation times the current price of that coin determines its market cap value, okay? Now keep in mind, these are currently cryptocurrencies are very speculative market caps. So the actual numbers when it comes to intrinsic value don't mean too much, but we can use them when comparing against other coins in the same space because they're all speculative at this stage, right? Market capitalization refers to how much a company is worth as determined by the stock market. In our case, market capitalization of these coins determines how much a company is worth as determined by the cryptocurrency market and by market participants, all right? Okay, so now guys, to make this even more simple, to kind of, let's read a little bit more here. Understanding market capitalization. Market capitalization is a quick and easy method for estimating companies' value by extrapolating what the market thinks it is worth, okay? These numbers, the market cap, is not determined by me or you or what I think it's worth or what you think it's worth or what anyone else thinks it's worth. It's determined on what the entire market as a whole thinks it's worth, all right? Investors are essentially voting with their dollars, and that is reflected in the market cap, okay? We take a look at current cryptocurrency market cap. I don't like Bitcoin Cash. I don't like Bitcoin SV. I think Bitcoin SV is a scam. But it doesn't matter what I think, guys. It matters what the market thinks. And currently the market thinks that Bitcoin SV is the 6th most valuable cryptocurrency in the space. I don't know much about Bitcoin SV. All right? All I know is the controversies that surrounds it. I don't know much about Bitcoin Cash. I haven't done my due diligence. I haven't done my research. I have no idea about EOS or Tezos or Stellar. I know a little bit about them, but the point is, it doesn't matter what I think, guys. It doesn't matter what I think about Bitcoin Cash or what I think about Bitcoin SV, because the market's telling me that it's currently valued as the 6th most valuable coin for whatever reason. Investors that are voting with their dollars are voting for Bitcoin SV as the #6 coin at this particular moment in time. Will that be the case a year from now? Who knows? Will that be the case 5 years from now? No one knows. But currently, at this moment in time, Bitcoin SV, for whatever reason, is valued at as the 6th most valuable coin in the space, okay? And it's determined by market participants putting their money where their mouth is, okay? It doesn't matter what you or I think about the coin. This tells us that market participants value it at the #6 coin in the space. Now, just to make things a little bit easier, I've made a little graph on this as well to hopefully kind of get the idea across. All right, so here is a way that I'm going to explain to you guys what market cap means for those that are still having trouble grasping what I'm trying to say here. Imagine that the total market cap is made up of a bunch of different market participants, and we cumulatively have $100 to spend, okay? So let's just take 5 individuals, Billy, Bob, Joe, Jane, and Jack, all right? These 5 individuals have $100 worth of money to spend on cryptocurrencies. They can spend them on whatever cryptocurrency they like. There's no requirement that they have to buy more Bitcoin or more XRP or more Link or whatever it is. They are voting with their dollars on what Bitcoin or what cryptocurrencies they believe are the most valuable, okay? So all of these 5 market participants, all right, decide that, hey, we think Bitcoin's worth a lot. Each of these 5 market participants has $20 to spend, and there's 100 total dollars. 70 of those dollars get spent on Bitcoin, okay? That means that these market participants are spending 7/10 of their total investment portfolio on Bitcoin because they think that Bitcoin is worth the most out of all these coins, okay? Now they're spending $10 cumulatively of the total 100, 10% on XRP. They're spending 10% on Ethereum. They're spending $4% on Link, 3% on other alts, and 3% on other alts like that. What I'm trying to get at here, guys, is it doesn't matter if I think that Ethereum is a scam, because currently $10 out of the entire $100 worth of money in this space is spent on Ethereum, okay? And $4 is spent on Link, and $3 is spent on some other alt, okay? So despite many people saying that there's no demand for XRP, the fact that XRP is currently the top 3 coin by market cap and the fact that it's been that way for 6 years shows us, as a matter of fact, that XRP is the third most in-demand coin in the space at this point of time, okay? And it's been that way for 6 years. So it doesn't matter if you think it's a scam or if I think it's a scam. The reality of the situation is that there is tremendous demand for XRP, and that is proven factually by the amount of money that is being invested into XRP, all right? Out of the total amount of money that is being invested in the cryptocurrency space, XRP currently holds the third largest amount. Now, again, there's a difference between actual intrinsic value of any of these coins and the amount of money that's inside of them, okay? For XRP to have a market cap of $10, it doesn't mean that there's literally $10 of money invested in XRP. That's a whole nother discussion, because the market cap is determined by the last traded price on the markets, okay? If the last traded price of XRP on the market is 20 cents, then the market cap is 20 cents times the total supply. If the last traded price is 25 cents, then the market cap is 25 cents times the total supply. Okay, so the market can be 25 cents one night, and then tomorrow, one guy, for whatever reason, the demand and supply factors could change, and every seller on the market could decide he wants to raise his price to 30 cents overnight. Okay, and if that happens and a transaction executes at 30 cents from 20 cents, then the market cap of XRP will jump by 30% overnight. Okay, this is an extreme example. It's not going to happen like that, but the point is that market cap, high value market cap, doesn't necessarily mean that that exact amount of dollars has been thrown into this coin. It just means that this particular moment in time, that is a current value based on the last traded price of this coin, and based on the circulating supply, okay? But the bottom line, guys, is XRP is the third most in-demand coin in the space. Anyone saying that there's no demand for XRP is just honestly just spreading FUD. The facts are that the current most in-demand coin in the space is Bitcoin, the second most in demand is Ethereum, and the third most in demand is XRP, all right? So that settles that particular aspect of FUD, people saying that there's no demand for this coin. In reality, there's plenty of demand for it. It's just that the guys who are saying there's no demand for it aren't the ones voting with their dollars. There's bigger players that are voting with their dollars, and they're voting for XRP right after Bitcoin and Ethereum. All right, guys, the next piece of FUD that we're going to debunk here is the idea that nobody is using XRP. So we've already talked about what people say there's no demand for XRP. We've shown that there's definitely demand for XRP. Now let's talk about who's using XRP, because people say no one's using XRP, no one's ever going to use it. It's a shit coin. There's no point in owning it. It doesn't have any use case. Guys, this is probably the most obvious. Thing that one can see by doing 10 minutes of research on Google. That XRP is probably one of the very few cryptocurrencies in the space right now that has a valid use case, that actually has a use case that is actually being used in practice, not in theory, but in practice today by companies for the use case that it was meant to be used for on a very large scale. So let's talk about who's actually using XRP, all right? Now, the first thing that I want to make very clear is that Ripple and XRP, two different things, obviously. Ripple being the company and XRP being the token. Ripple is a software company. They sell software. The software that they sell is now called RippleNet. That is a software that they sell to their banking partners. Those banking partners can then flip a switch to begin using their other product called ODL along with their RippleNet software, if they so choose. So Ripple has over 300 partners at this point in time that are currently using their RippleNet. Right here, RippleNet makes it easy for us to provide a diverse network of 300 plus financial institutions worldwide to enable faster, lower cost payments around the world. So Ripple is already telling us they have over 300 financial institutions currently using RippleNet, okay? Now that doesn't mean that 300 financial institutions are using XRP. It means that 300 financial institutions are using their software RippleNet in some way or another. Of these, we have American Express, MoneyGram, PNC, Santander, SBI, Remit, not officially announced yet, sort of unofficially announced, depending on the research that you do. Bank of America, currently partnered with Ripple as well, and that doesn't mean that they're using XRP. It means that they're using Ripple's software. However, about a year ago, Ripple launched ODL, which is their on-demand liquidity product that uses XRP specifically, all right? Any company that is using ODL is, by definition, using XRP to conduct their business, okay? So how many companies are using XRP today, aside from the ones that are currently partnered with Ripple and currently using RippleNet? Well, it's been, I think, about a year since ODL was launched, 24 companies are currently using, today, in practice, XRP in their daily functions of business, all right? When people say no one's using XRP, it's a blatant lie. 24 companies are currently using XRP today, all right? And this is a list of some of those companies that are currently using XRP: Bittrex, Bitso, Bitstamp. These are some exchanges that are using them. SBI Virtual Currencies, Via America, I think, is a remittance company. SendFriend, another remittance, I believe. Interbank, that's another company. MoneyGram, of course, we know that Ripple's partnered with them. TransferGo, another remittance company. FlashFX, another remittance company. These companies are actually using XRP today to do business. All right. Now let's take a look at one in particular that has created some waves over the last year or so, and that is going to be Bitso, guys. Bitso, the exchange. It's Mexico's largest cryptocurrency exchange. Let's take a look at what they've been able to do with XRP. So, guys, Bitso is the largest cryptocurrency exchange in Mexico with a customer base of more than 750,000 users. All right, and they began working together last April using on-demand liquidity. All right, to help make remittance payments between Mexico and the United States from US dollars to Mexican pesos in a more efficient manner. Okay, the Latin American market offers enormous potential with more than $30 billion in remittances annually. That means that over $30 billion of remittances are transferred between America and Mexico every year. Okay, more than 30 billion. All right. In a recent update, Bitso CEO Daniel Vogel reported a strong growth in transactions with on-demand liquidity and the XRP token. Okay, according to a tweet, Bitso processed more than $4.3 billion in pesos in April 2020, the equivalent of approximately $179 million in XRP remittances. These are remittances that they're utilizing XRP, okay, for its stated use case. It's actually being used for that today, all right? In the previous month, the figure was only about 2.67 billion pesos. The bottom line, guys, is since they started using these remittances with XRP, the numbers have been ramping up every single month, okay? Now, in February, okay, this is XRP to Mexican pesos remittances, all right? Right over here, Ripple and Bitso are pursuing an ambitious goal for the payment corridor between the USA and Mexico. Vogel stated in a podcast in February that his company plans to process 20% of all remittances to Mexico. Guys, I want you to understand what this means. This means that 2 out of every $10 sent from the United States to Mexico will be transferred using XRP, okay? This is one of the largest remittance corridors in the world. I believe it might actually be the largest between the United States and Mexico. Every year, over $30 billion of United States dollars are sent to Mexico, sent overseas in cross-border payments, and it is the largest corridor meaning US dollars to Mexican pesos, or US dollars to euros, or US dollars to Australian dollars. That's one corridor. The US dollar to Mexican peso corridor is one of the largest corridors and one of the largest markets in the world with over $30 billion in remittances. And the goal is to capture 20% of that, a fifth of that, through XRP, okay? Now let's take a look at what they've been able to accomplish so far, because numbers are great, but talk is cheap. What have they actually been able to do, all right? All right, guys, so let's take a look at what they've actually been able to do currently. So as we can see that the amount of pesos or the amount of transfers that we're seeing using XRP has been increasing since launch in April of 2019. It's now been a year, and every month that number has been going up. As recently as April, the amount that was actually sent using XRP was $179 million worth of remittances, okay? Now, if we were to extrapolate that number across the year, if they're doing $180,000 million in 1 month, let's round that up to 200 million to make it easy. 200 million in a month times 12 months in a year is $2.4 million in XRP, $2.4 billion in XRP remittances. 2.4 billion out of a 30 billion market already puts them at 4.8%. Okay, doing this in my head. 2.4 billion of 30 billion already puts them at 8%. Okay, so they've already hit 8% of the total remittances that are being sent from the United States to Mexico. They've already captured 8% of that entire share, assuming that the rate of that they did in April continues and stays steady, doesn't have an increase or doesn't decrease. 8% has already been captured in remittances using XRP. All right, and this happened in a year. Okay, they're going for 20%. They've already hit 8%. I think 20%, looking at this rate of increase, is fairly reasonable to expect, okay? And by the time they reach 20% of all the remittances that are being done from the United States to Mexico, that means that every year they are sending 20% of 30 billion, being $6 billion in payments through XRP, using XRP today, $6 billion in remittances annually, okay? And that's if they hit their target of 20% and simply don't exceed that. For whatever reason, they decide to stop there or growth slows down at 20%. That's still $6 billion in annual remittances using XRP. Tell me, what other cryptocurrency in the space right now is actually being used for its use case that it was made for at this level to this extent? There are not many, okay? Many, if any at all, being used at this extent. So for people to say that XRP is not being used, it's false. It's completely false. It's being used in a way that it was meant to be used, in a way that possibly no other crypto is currently being used, right? So this is another one of the major FUD issues that I'm trying to debunk here. Now, what is the purpose of using XRP for these transfers? Why don't they just use transfers through wire payments, through wire transfers using the SWIFT system? Why don't they stick to remittances using other softwares? What is the benefit of actually using XRP? We're seeing that it's being used, but what's the benefit? Why is it being used in the way that it is being used at this point in time? So guys, let's talk a little bit about how these XRP transfers benefit both the end consumer and the companies that are doing them, and why they're so keen on doing this. I'm not sure if any of you guys have ever sent a wire transfer, but I'm in business, so I send wire transfers all the time overseas, and it's probably the most frustrating experience that I have to deal with. Number one, I can send these wire transfers online, but it's a little bit of a headache. If I don't send them by 1 p.m. online, they get delayed till the next business day, and the banks close at 4 or 5. So typically, I'm very busy. I'll usually just head to the bank because I don't have time to get the wire transfers done before 1 p.m., and I'll head to the bank before 4 or 5, and I'll do the wire transfer that way. It takes me anywhere from, I'd say, 15 to 30 minutes at the bank just to sit down with a banker and then be able to send this wire transfer. It costs me $45 US to send a wire transfer, guys. $45 to send a wire transfer, okay? And then on top of that, if I send this wire transfer on a Friday, okay, it doesn't reach my client until Monday or Tuesday. Okay, so that's 48 hours if I send it on Friday. If I send it on a weekday, if I send it on a Tuesday or a Thursday, it'll get there typically the next day if I can send it before they cut off the wire transfer time. If I don't manage to send it before that time period, which at the top of my head I can't remember what that time is, maybe 3 or 4 p.m., it gets delayed another 24 hours. Okay, so we're talking about 24 to 48 hours to send a wire transfer. It's very expensive. And if I send it on a Friday, then it gets there 3 to 4 days later, okay? It's a pain in the butt, all right, to send money. It shouldn't take this long. Here's what can be done with ODL, all right? The transaction happens instantly, is much more cost effective, and you know exactly when the recipient receives it. That's another thing. I don't know when my recipient gets the money. I have to keep asking him, hey, did you get the wire payment? Did you get the wire transfer? I really don't have any way of knowing once he's received it. When the money exits my account, I can see that it's gone. I don't know when when my recipient actually receives the funds. So that's another pain in the butt they have to deal with wire transfers. A typical wire transfer costs more than 5 times what Bitso's partners now pay when they exchange using RippleNet's ODL. Again, ODL using XRP. This is huge, okay? If you're a migrant worker in the US who's sending money back to your family in Mexico, every penny counts, every dollar counts, every peso counts. These families, again, are often surviving week to week on these remittances, so the immediateness, the speed at which ODL gets the money over to them versus the traditional process is huge, okay? And then the costs are a fraction. So again, every penny matters to these people that are sending money back to their families. So this is a huge, huge benefit, right? This is a huge benefit. So not only is Ripple working the way it was meant to do, like working the way it was meant to work, but it's saving people time and money. And that's the whole point of crypto, guys. That's the whole point of this technology. If it's not saving people time and money, if it's not making things more efficient, it's useless. So I know there's thousands of cryptocurrencies out there, but very few are actually delivering on the promises that they've made, and very few are actually functioning in a way that serves to make a process or a problem more efficient. And what XRP has set out to do is make the process of sending international wire transfers or sending international cross-border payments more effective, more efficient, and more efficient in every way, in a time and a cost perspective. And this is literally proof literally proof that it's happening and it's working. So for people to say that XRP, no one's using it, and XRP doesn't work, and it doesn't have a use case, and it doesn't serve a purpose, I mean, it's just, I don't know. I don't know what they're looking at. Are they looking at the facts? I highly doubt it, because this is literally proof that what XRP has set out to do, or what Ripple has set out to do with XRP, is working today in a way that, again, no other crypto, or maybe very few cryptos, are actually working today. All right, guys. Before I end this segment of this video here about this particular issue of FUD, there's one more thing I want to quickly cover. We've talked about the USD to Mexican peso corridor, and how it's the largest corridor in the world, and how XRP ideally will soon be responsible for sending 20% of those payments within a couple of years, or within the end of the year, or something like that is what the goal is. But we've talked about that. Keep in mind, USD to Mexican pesos is one corridor, guys. There's thousands of these corridors, okay? Ripple is just started ODL last year, and this was the first corridor that they targeted because it was the largest corridor to target, right? But they've now expanded into 4 other corridors that they're starting to ramp up liquidity in, using XRP, of course, and the goal is to continue this expansion over time. So while we are looking to capture 20% of the XRP Mexican corridor, that is just the start, guys. That is just the start. That's 6 billion of transfers using XRP is just from one corridor of thousands. So you can just consider how large this can really get. Right here, it says here that, for example, Bitso, so one of the corridors is Mexican pesos, another corridor is US dollars to Philippine pesos, and then another corridor is US dollars to Australian dollars. So these are 3 other corridors that have already been launched, that are already being used, and they're breaking all-time highs as far as liquidity goes in there every day. And then check this out. Check this out right here. Right here. Ripple aims to increase the XRP corridors in the Asia Pacific, Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Latin America regions by 2020. While it is not known how many new corridors Ripple will open this year, the number is said to be 20, guys. This is just the start of ODL. This is just the start of their expansion to new corridors, and that number, which is currently 5, is likely going to expand rapidly in the coming year. So this is just starting, guys, and already just starting, they're close to capturing, I mean, they've already captured $2 billion in remittances a year in the Mexican peso corridor. That's going to grow significantly, and they're already going after 4 other corridors with plans to open many more this year and in the coming year. So just keep that in mind. I think that pretty much covers what I wanted to get across with this FUD, that no one is using XRP. I think this makes it blatantly obvious that XRP is being used in many places and is successfully doing what Ripple had set out to do with XRP. So that pretty much covers the FUD about XRP not being used and XRP not having a use case. Let's move on to the next topic. All right, guys, so this next topic is about Jed McCaleb and him dumping XRP on the markets in the same way that people claim Ripple is dumping exorbitant amounts of XRP on the markets. I've seen these articles pop up. I've seen people commenting that, hey, again, Jed McCaleb's dumping millions of XRP on the market. There's no way the price is going to rise with all this sell pressure. Let's take a look at how much XRP Jed McCaleb is actually dumping on the market, where he's getting this XRP from, why this is happening. All right, so just to start it off, Jed McCaleb, guys, is the Ripple Labs co-founder. Okay, so he co-founded Ripple Labs, and it was reported that he had about 9 billion XRP in 2013 after leaving Ripple Labs as payment for establishing the company. Okay, so there was some dispute between the owners of Ripple Labs, and for whatever reason, whether he was removed or whether he left voluntarily over what, I don't know. I'm not going to speculate on that, but essentially he split from the company and was given 9 billion XRP as like a severance package, I guess, right? So he was given 9 billion XRP due to his contributions for building the company into what it was, and then he departed. All right. Now, with that 9 billion XRP, there was a deal in 2014 that was made between Ripple Labs and him to make sure that he could not dump enough XRP on the markets to crash the price or to cause any ill effects on the price. All right. So this was done with the intention of shielding the market from considerably large numbers that could potentially destabilize it. And then I guess it looks like he didn't honor the deal and was in a legal tussle for a bit, because it looks like he tried to circumvent that restriction by possibly giving XRP to his family members who would then try to sell in the market. Something I'm not too sure with exactly what happened here, but basically it looks like there may have been a breach of the contract, and so there were some legal issues, and then a new agreement was formed. A new contract was struck, and this happened 2 years later after the initial deal was struck. So I'm guessing in around 2016, right? So in 2016, a new contract was made, okay? And in this contract, it was outlined that Jed would have to donate $2 billion of his XRP to any charity that he wished, right? Donor advised fund that he could choose. And the rules by which this fund could sell the XRP were the same ones that Jed McCaleb himself had to follow, okay? And then the remaining 5.3 billion XRP that belongs to Jed were given back to Ripple to hold, right? Essentially to hold, to make sure that he can't sell all 5.3 billion at once. And Ripple would then disperse this XRP over time to his wallet, essentially paying him out a portion of his XRP that he owns to his wallet so that he could dispose of it as he wishes when he receives it in a way that wouldn't negatively affect the price, right? So Ripple Labs would regulate the discharge and sale of his XRP as stated in the contract. Now the nitty-gritty details of this contract are right here, right? So over the first year of the deal, Jed McCaleb will only be able to jointly sell 0.5% of the average daily volume of XRP for 1 day, including weekends and holidays. The second and third years will allow a sale of 0.75%. The fourth year will allow a sale of 1%, and the fifth year would allow, after the fourth year, he'd be allowed to sell 1.5% of the average daily volume, right? So in this sense, now Ripple is not only holding his XRP, but they're rationing it out to him, and they have a contract that says that he can only sell X amount of XRP, okay, per day. Now, what this means, guys, is that Ripple is doing what they need to do through a legal way of doing it by laws that Jed McCaleb has agreed to, that he's signed off on, to make sure that no matter how much XRP Jed McCaleb sells, it will not negatively affect the price of XRP in a drastic way. All right, guys, so let's take a look at how much XRP Jed McCaleb is actually selling on the market and whether or not it's anything meaningful or whether or not it has an impact on the price of XRP, right? So right here, analyzing known wallets for Ripple co-founder Jed McCaleb shows he sold off at least 54 million XRP between April 1st to 30th, right? 54 million XRP means he's selling about 1.8 million XRP daily in April, right? So every day he's dumping 1.8 million XRP onto the markets, okay? This totals 54 million XRP, $11.7 million at the time of press. Do you guys remember how much XRP is sold or is traded on average every day, right? Average daily volume. Do you guys remember how much that was? Let's take a look at that so we can get an idea of how much $11.7 million worth of XRP being sold per month actually is. All right, guys, so again, here let's remind ourselves of how much average daily volume of XRP is transacted per day. In quarter 3 2019 and quarter 4 2019, we had about $200 million of XRP volume per day, average daily volume, right? So 200 million per day. Now let's go back and take a look at how much Jed was selling in the month of April and how much he was selling per day in relation to the $200 million in volume that's done per day. So again, Jed McCaleb, 1.8 million tokens per day for a total of $11.7 million worth of XRP sold in April, right? Now, $11.7 million in April, again, that's 1 month. So 11.7 million divided by 30 gives us about $300,000 worth of XRP sold per day, all right? $300,000 worth of XRP sold per day. And how much XRP is transacted per day? Again, 200 million, okay? Which means that he is selling, or let's go with 11.7 million, 300,000 per day out of 200 million. So 300,000 divided by 200 million gives us a rate of sale that equates to 300,000 divided by 200 million means he's selling 0.15% of XRP volume. He's contributing to 0.15% of XRP volume per day. So 0.15%, guys, of daily volume, to say that that's negatively affecting the markets or to be worried about that or concerned about that, there's no need to. It's FUD. It's fear, uncertainty, and doubt. People hear numbers like he's dumping 1.8 million tokens a day and they automatically think, wow, that's such a huge amount. how can price rise? It must be affecting things negatively. That's uncertainty. That's not knowing, right? That's not doing the research to find out how much is actually being dumped and how much it's affecting the markets. Doubt. That's doubt, and it's propagated by people saying things like, "Oh, well, Jed McCaleb dumps millions of XRP per month. There's no way that XRP can go up." They make these bold claims, but when it comes to actually looking at the facts, the reality of the situation is that the amount that he's selling is negligible, guys. It's negligible. It's not going to make a difference. All right. Now, yes, does it have sell pressure? Yes, it does. Like anyone, like me or you or your friend next door selling XRP on the markets, it does have some level of sell pressure, but that level of sell pressure being at 0.15% of average daily volume is negligible. Okay, it doesn't make a difference. All right. Now, the whole point here, guys, is not only does Jed McCaleb not have his own XRP, he's not even holding the 5.3 billion XRP that he owns. It's being held by Ripple, who's rationing it out to him. At the same time, there's a legal contract binding him to how much of this he can sell, and it's been put in place by Ripple to make sure that his sales do not negatively affect the price of XRP or the market in any noticeable way. All right, it's all done legally. He's signed a contract. He's agreed to these terms. So for people to be concerned about him dumping and that having negative effects on the price of XRP, it's an unfound concern, right? There's no need to be concerned about this, guys. It's all handled right now by Ripple through legal contracts to make sure that in no way does this negatively hurt the price of XRP. So that is pretty much all the FUD around Jed McCaleb dumping pretty much solved here. You guys can make conclusions for yourself, but I think it's pretty obvious with the amount of XRP that he's actually dumping when it comes down to the numbers and comparing it to the amount of volume being traded. It is really just a negligible amount. All right, guys, the next topic of FUD that we're going to discuss is the idea that XRP is centralized, all right? Now, there's a difference between centralization and wealth inequality, and I think that's something that often gets confused a little bit. When we talk about a network, a crypto network being decentralized, we're talking about the actual network, right, and the nodes that control that network, that control the voting power and all these other things. We're not talking about the wealth distribution because, yes, the wealth distribution for XRP is skewed, but it's also skewed with almost every other coin, Bitcoin included, right? So I haven't looked at other coins, but I'm pretty sure Litecoin is just as skewed in terms of wealth distribution as well. Just like the US dollar, where 75% of all the US dollars are held by 10% of the citizens, and I think it's something like 50 or 60% for the top 1% of citizens. That's called wealth inequality and wealth distribution and wealth being centralized to a select few, but it's not the same type of decentralization and centralization that we talk about in crypto networks, right? So it's important to make that distinction, and it's important to recognize that yes, Ripple does hold 50% of all the XRP in existence, but again, it's locked away. It's out of their control. They can't access it. It's locked away in an escrow, right? In this case, 2.8% of the top wallet addresses control 95% of the supply of Bitcoin. Bitcoin's wealth distribution is also skewed. Now, this does include exchanges, right? So 2.8% of wallet addresses that control 95% of the supply of Bitcoin does include exchanges that control major chunks of the supply of Bitcoin because it's an exchange that people are storing their funds on, right? So it's not completely accurate to say that 2.8% do control 95%. I mean, depending on how you look at it, technically that's true. They do control 95% of the supply of Bitcoin, but any user on exchange can withdraw his funds and reduce this percentage of 95% if they wanted to, right? So it's not completely, to be objective, it's not as bad as it seems, I should say. But the point is that wealth distribution being skewed is one thing, and that's a separate factor from centralization of a network, okay? Centralization of a network is talking about someone who actually controls the actual blockchain network, the actual ledger, right? And in this case, those two things often get conflated and mixed around a lot between people that are making this argument. But let's talk about, is XRP centralized from a network perspective? Does Ripple control the XRP network? That's the big question. And that's a question that many people have asked and many people don't seem to understand. So let's talk about that a little bit. So I found this answer on Quora, and Mr. Otis here answered it very, very well. And so I want to just go over his answer, kind of explain things in a very simple way, and I think this will just kind of clear off the problems right off the bat. So the question is XRP centralized, right? So this is what he says. The other answers you've been getting this claim that XRP is centralized because Ripple owns so many of the coins. This is false. Yes, Ripple owns a lot of XRP. Yes, most of Ripple's holdings are in escrow that they cannot access. But Ripple does not control anything by holding them or releasing them because they're contractually obligated to release them on a strict schedule, right? the distribution of 1 billion XRP per month, right? In order to exert control over the XRP market, Ripple would have to be able to release or fail to release XRP at will, which they cannot do, all right? All this is secondary. This is the key. This is talking about the wealth distribution, the wealth inequality. This is the key. This is what's more important, okay? All this is secondary, however, to the really salient fact, which is that the network on which XRP lives is decentralized and not at all controlled by Ripple. If Ripple ceased to exist tomorrow, XRP would go on unimpeded because Ripple does not control the XRP network, right? It doesn't matter how much XRP Ripple owns, it matters who owns the network. And nobody owns the network which is decentralized, okay? Now, let me talk about this a little bit more to make this very clear, okay? How does the Ripple consensus process work, okay? Here's another great answer by Puneet Gupta, so we're going to talk about this, and then we'll go on to another article. The Ripple network receives transactions from different nodes, okay? The goal of consensus is to write the valid transactions to the ledger. When I make a transaction using XRP, it's a transaction that's executed. The goal of consensus is to verify that this transaction is legitimate and then write it onto the ledger, the ledger where it cannot be edited, right? So these, after 50% of these nodes approve the transactions, the batch of the approved transactions is pushed further. And then once it reaches a supermajority of approvals, meaning 80% of the nodes approve the transaction is then written on the ledger where it cannot be removed. So 80% of these nodes need to approve the transaction for the transaction to be written on the ledger. If one entity were to control 80% of these nodes, one can argue that they could reject or accept transactions at will, thereby controlling the network and making it a centralized network. So how many of these nodes does Ripple own? Out of this 80% that's needed to approve a transaction, how many do they own? Can they feasibly control this and decide which transactions to accept and which transactions to deny, thereby exerting power over the ledger and making it a centralized ledger? Guys, right now Ripple runs only less than 7% of the current validators on the XRP ledger, right? They need a lot more than this to control the ledger. They run less than 7%. So there's no way that one can call XRP centralized, okay? Of approximately the 150 validators running today, Ripple runs less than half of them. Ripple runs 7% of them, which is I think like 20 validators or something, right? Unlike Bitcoin and Ethereum, where one miner could have 51% of the hashing power, we talk about this, the 51% attack. Each Ripple validator only has one vote in support of an exchange or ordering a transaction. Therefore, since Ripple controls less than 50% of trusted validators, again, 7%, Ripple is unable to control the XRP ledger. This is the bottom line, guys. Everyone saying that the XRP ledger is centralized is, number one, either confusing wealth inequality and wealth distribution with centralization of a network, or number two, hasn't looked at the facts and done the research to see that Ripple only controls 7% of the validators, right? So they're unable to control the XRP ledger because they control less than 50% of these trusted validators, okay? So that's the bottom line. Ripple is simply not centralized, okay? I think that pretty much clears up this topic of FUD that happens to come up a lot. All right, everyone, this next topic of FUD is regarding the JP Morgan coin and similar banking coins, CBDCs, any other stable coin, essentially. People talk about stable coins. What's the need of XRP when we have stable coins? Or JP Morgan coin is going to destroy XRP. Libra is going to destroy XRP. There's no use for those when JP Morgan's making their own coin, all right? Let's talk about that particular aspect of FUD, okay? Now, some key important facts here, all right? Here you go. The coin is fundamentally different from cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. Most significantly, it is redeemable at a 1-to-1 ratio for fiat currency held by JP Morgan, okay? This is key. This tells us that JP Morgan coin is simply another stable coin made by JP Morgan that's redeemable for fiat, that's redeemable for the US dollar, okay? So it's the same as Tether, it's the same as USDC, it's the same as any other stablecoin that's attached, that's pegged to the US dollars, and it comes with all the same risks. If the United States goes to war and the US dollar is weakened, the value of the JP Morgan coin that you're holding is automatically reduced. The value of the Tether that you're holding is automatically reduced because those are tied to the US dollar. So they suffer from being tied to this fiat currency, right? The whole point of having crypto and being decentralized is so that we don't need to rely on the strength of the US dollar, right? And these stable coins are pegged to the US dollar, so they don't save you from any of that risk that's associated with these traditional fiat currencies, okay? So that's the first thing that I need to be very clear about, all right? Now, the other thing, JP Morgan coin is primarily a tool to help instantly transfer funds between some of JP Morgan's clients. This is the key. It is not. It's an internally used coin used within JP Morgan and their client. It's not being used externally. All right. If you're not a JP Morgan client, you cannot access JPM coin. You cannot go buy it on the market. You cannot use it. Right. This coin is primarily a tool to help instantly transfer funds between some of their JP Morgan clients. Okay. So such a digital currency is needed for exchange of money to take place between parties in a blockchain ledger. JPM coin is a tool that helps to complete that process more efficiently than traditional settlements within its own network. Okay. Now further, here you go. While JP Morgan coin is similar to other stablecoins, there are also some crucial differences. First, most stablecoins are open access and available to the public. On the other hand, JP Morgan coin will only be available to specific JP Morgan clients with proper permissions. This is a closed network. It's not an open network like XRP. Anyone can buy XRP. Anyone in the public can buy XRP and transact with it. JP Morgan coin is literally made within JP Morgan for their own internal use. It's not competing with XRP, nor does it have the same clientele, okay? In particular, those clients must be institutional customers of the bank, okay? Now, finally, the JPM coin will always be redeemable in fiat currency held by JP Morgan, okay? This means that you, when purchasing JP Morgan coin, number one, you can't even do it if you're you or me. You have to be a client. If you are a client and you're buying JP Morgan coin to transact with, you are trusting in JP Morgan. JP Morgan is the entity that controls the network. JP Morgan coin is centralized to JP Morgan. They are responsible for redeeming the coin. You are betting on their solvency when you buy this coin. You're hoping, you're believing that they will not be insolvent. If JP Morgan flips upside down and goes bankrupt, guess what? Your JP Morgan coin is worthless now because it's backed by the money that they have, okay? So this is just like, this argument that JP Morgan is going to destroy XRP or that it's competing with XRP is completely false. And it's all laid out right here in very simple terms, guys. It's nothing like XRP. It's centralized. It's internal. It's private. And it's just used for JP Morgan to handle their business in a more efficient manner, okay, within their own clients. This isn't going to be a coin that JP Morgan sends to Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo doesn't want JP Morgan coin. They're not going to trust JP Morgan, right? They're not going to trust something that's backed by their competitor. It makes no sense, right? XRP, on the other hand, is not centralized to any one network. We already talked about how Ripple does not control XRP. So XRP is open and permissionless, and it's not tied to a fiat currency. So it doesn't suffer from the same risks. It doesn't have the same counterparty risk. It's not controlled by Wells Fargo, right? So JP Morgan isn't afraid of using it because Wells Fargo controls it. And Wells Fargo might go bankrupt tomorrow, and then the value of their coin, of their XRP coin, might go to zero. It's not pegged to any of that stuff, and it's not tied to any of that risk. Okay, so the idea that JP Morgan coin or any other stable coin for that matter that's pegged to any other fiat currency, Libra included, because Libra is pegged to a bunch of fiat currencies, have nothing to do with XRP. Do not control or do not target the same target market as XRP. Do not serve the same purpose as XRP. There's simply nothing to. There's no point in comparing. It's like comparing apples and oranges, guys. This was a really simple thing to debunk. I hope this makes it clear. It was very straightforward to answer this question because it's all laid out right here for you guys. If you have any questions, so that's pretty much it on this particular topic of FUD. A really easy one to debunk. Let's move on to the next. All right, guys, this next topic of FUD is one that has popped up pretty recently and regarding a Ripple deletable accounts amendment, right? So I've seen people post on Twitter, oh, look at this, Ripple can now delete your account, right? They can alter the ledger. They can delete transactions in the ledger. This is super centralized. How can this be allowed? XRP is a scam. All right, let's take a look at what this really is. Nothing of that nature, of course, and it just takes a few Google searches to find out. So basically, this is an amendment that was passed recently that allows the Ripple accounts to be deleted, right? Inactive accounts essentially that are not being used. So as many people know, one of the features of the XRP ledger is the reserve, meaning that to submit transactions and address, a wallet must hold a minimum amount of XRP in the ledger. You cannot send this XRP to other addresses. It's an amount of 20 XRP that's held in reserve for any wallet, right? To fund a new address, you must send enough XRP to meet the reserve requirement. The current minimum reserve requirement is 20 XRP, right? So up until now, every address needs to be funded with 20 XRP, and this 20 XRP could not be moved once it arrived. It was essentially locked into that wallet, whether or not you were using it. Now, what they've done is they've enabled a feature that was voted on after obtaining an 80% majority vote. Again, you need an 80% supermajority to pass any amendments. So this feature was added that allows you to actually delete these accounts, okay? So people immediately jumped on and said, oh, look, Ripple can delete your accounts. It can delete your transactions. Scam, 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 okay? No, guys, Ripple cannot delete your accounts. Who deletes the accounts and how? only the owner of the account, the entity that holds the private keys, executes an account delete transaction like any other transaction, right? So only if I have my own wallet, only I can access it, only I can delete my account, okay? Does that delete transactions that are on the ledger already? If I sent 10 XRP to my friend yesterday and that transaction was recorded on the XRP ledger, does that mean that if I delete my account, that transaction also gets deleted off the ledger? No, it doesn't, guys. That transaction will stay there. It does not change any transactions on the ledger. The ledger is set in stone essentially and cannot be changed by these account deletions. It just deletes that account, and it allows me to send 15 of the 20 XRP that was locked away in that wallet to another one of my wallets. Essentially, it's a way of destroying that wallet and at the same time pulling out 15 of those 20 XRP that were locked in, right? The remaining 5 XRP out of the 20 is burned as a transaction cost, okay? And that's pretty much it. That's all this is, guys. It allows you to get rid of an inactive account, withdraw 15 of the 20 XRP that's locked in there, and proceed with your life, okay? It doesn't mean that you can delete transactions off the ledger. It doesn't mean that it's going to edit any information on the ledger. It just means that you can delete your account and withdraw the XRP that was previously locked in. It's not really a big issue. It's a pretty small change, but it's of course blown out of proportion when it comes to XRP, and people love to jump on and call it a scam. So that's why we had this issue pop up recently. Why was this feature enabled? Account owners can now retrieve any XRP remaining in their accounts of the 20 that's locked away. Each new version of the XRP's ledger's public ledger chain contains the full state of the ledger, which increases in size with each new account. As users delete their accounts, this will reduce the size of the ledger, right? So that's all it does, guys. That's all it really does. This is a pretty simple little FUD thing that I just want to touch on because I've been hearing it pop up. All right, guys, and that pretty much covers it. That covers all of the topics that I wanted to discuss here. There was a few things that I wasn't able to get to. I was making this video kind of doing it as I went along, and of course was not expecting it to end up taking this long. And there's some other topics that I could have covered that I didn't get a chance to cover. Maybe I'll save those for another video if you guys are interested. Again, if you enjoyed this video, you liked it, and you want to see more things like this, please like, share, and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. Give me a follow on Twitter. Give me a follow on YouTube as well, guys. And I will catch you for the next one. All right, thanks, guys. Bye.